Hello, hello. Jenny Bowling here with Pivot to Prosperity, brought to you by Pivotal Real Estate Investments, where we help our investors build wealth and income through commercial real estate that improves communities. And today, our guest is Yonah Weiss, the one and only Yonah Weiss. Welcome, Yonah.
Grateful to be here. Thanks so much, Jenny. It's awesome to join you on the show.
Well, I appreciate you coming, and I want to read your bio. So I will let you fill in what's not in the bio after that. Okay. Yonah is a powerhouse with property owners' tax savings. As business director at Madison SPECS, a national cost segregation leader, he has assisted clients in saving hundreds of millions of dollars in, I lost my place there, tax savings through cost segregation. I could have said it. He has a background in it in teaching and a passion for real estate and helping others. He's a real estate investor and host of the top podcast, Weiss Advice. Very good. Thank you.
There you
And
go. Awesome.
so tell us where you are, what you do these days, how you spend most of your time.
Grateful to be here. Like I said, I actually live in Israel, so I am remote in pretty much everything that I do, but I work, meaning my business and everything I do is based in the US. Um, Grew up in California, so that's obviously where my accent comes from. But yeah, focus on the cost segregation. That's been my main business for the past 7 years or so. Doing a lot of investing on the limited partnership side as passive investing for the past 8 years or so. And that's in a nutshell what I got going.
Very good. Now, so when you are looking to invest yourself, let me ask you then, are you usually looking for the tax write-offs for yourself, or are you looking more for cash flow or appreciation, or what's your play on it since you know so much about the tax savings aspect?
Listen, they're all awesome, parts of the real estate investing. To be honest, the tax savings, because I'm not a real estate professional per se, they are something that, obviously you can't overlook the benefits of the tax savings that come along with real estate investing. But for me, cash flow and appreciation have always been the number one, things I look at in an investment. It's hard to gauge. Obviously appreciation is a little bit hard to predict. You can do it based on your due diligence and factors that historically have had appreciation in areas, but cash flow is obviously a big one as well.
Right, right. Yes. So, why don't you start maybe with explaining what cost segregation is, and that will, of course, segue into the rest of it.
Absolutely. So it's a weird way, and obviously the history behind this, but it's kind of a weird name of breaking down a property into its components for tax purposes, which allow you to depreciate certain components of the property at a faster rate than the standard long 39 or 27 and a half year depreciation. And so the way I like to look at cost segregation is that it's a cash flow mechanism that allows you to pull from potential deductions, and pull them and use them in the current year so that you can have less tax liability, have more cash flow to then reinvest.
So, why don't you go ahead and give an example?
Yeah, I mean, so it's for example, anything that is interior in a property that's non-structural, like furniture or fixtures, appliances, even things like cabinets or countertops in a multifamily property, you'll have flooring, carpeting, or vinyl flooring. All of that, the IRS defines as a 5-year depreciation schedule, which means you can identify through the process of cost segregation, we're identifying what everything is in a property and then assigning a value to that and then taking those deductions over a 5-year period as opposed to that longer, again, like I said, 27 and a half or 39-year period. Now, there's something called bonus depreciation as well, which is a law that allows you to take as a lump sum all of those accelerated deductions in the first year. So that's a huge aspect of it. But again, what we're doing, instead of taking a small amount, an equal amount of tax deductions every single year, which, don't get me wrong, depreciation in of itself is amazing, right? Depreciation is probably one of the best tax advantages that come with real estate. It just allows you to take a deduction as if the property were going down in value, when in fact it's not. It's not intrinsic to the property, and the property is not actually necessarily going down in value, but you're allowed to take a write-off from your taxes as if it were. And so what we're doing cost seg is essentially just like an accelerated or advanced form of depreciation.
Great explanation. Great. So, and if we took that example just another step further, say I'm a new investor and I'm looking to put $100,000 into a multifamily property that's a value add scenario. So you're going to be improving the value as you add add dollars. The CapEx money is an investment to improve it, but at the same time, you have this cost seg study. If you're the GPs and you bring in someone like yourself to do the cost segregation study, then even before closing, oftentimes we would know roughly what those numbers are. And so we would try to relate that to our investors. And the way that comes out, I'm going to hand this to you in a second, would
I'm
be
following.
would be that if somebody invests that 100,000, they might have a write down. Go ahead and take it from there. How does that enter with your stuff?
Yeah, anyone who's investing in a property, even if it's as a limited partner, a passive investor per se, is going to receive a portion of the depreciation. And so depending on how much the cost seg can, return, in many cases, with leverage is an important factor, and I'll touch on that in a second, but you're able to get back as a first year tax write-off, 100% of your investment in the first year. That's how powerful the cost seg can be. You can put in $100,000 and receive $100,000, tax deduction. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but that's what cost seg can do. Now, I did mention earlier, kind of in passing, that I'm not a real estate professional, and what that means is there's specific rules in the tax code of who can use these passive deductions or these depreciation deductions, and that does depend on your occupation, unfortunately, because typically speaking, real estate income, okay, if you have rental properties or you're passively investing, all of that income is considered passive income, even though, real estate isn't necessarily passive by any means, but the IRS treats it as such from an income perspective, which means depreciation, being a passive deduction, is only allowed to use to offset that passive income, that real estate rental income. So if you're not a real estate professional, if you're a high earning W-2, employee, or you own your own business, but you're not a full-time real estate professional, then you have a limitation. You're not able to use those deductions from cost seg to offset your active income or any other source of income. So that's a huge thing. I find tons of people in, you talk about, you might you invest $100,000 and you're going to get back this big, tax write-off, but they don't tell you the but, right? The but is the most important part, is that you may not actually be able to use that beyond your passive income. It doesn't get lost, but it's limited. And so you can use it, it carries forward. You can use it next year or in future years for tax deductions, or it can be released to help to offset the sale of the property, as these passive losses or these passive deductions can be used to offset passive gains from the sale of real estate. So it's not all lost. It's just a little, in my opinion, a little bit misleading when syndicators will put in, oh, invest $100,000, you're going to get back, $100,000 deduction. And people are like, awesome, I can now, write that off my W-2. And it's just not the case.
Right, right. Very important point. And so for those W-2 employees in that situation, do you have some advice? Do you recommend they go get a rental property or two and then have that passive income to write against it? Or what do you usually say?
There are a couple things. Number one,
And we're
yeah, go
not
ahead.
attorneys, we're not
Right. This is not
financial
legal advice.
planners, so this isn't,
Exactly.
so it's not advice. I take that back. Suggestions or possible answers? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is general education, and I think obviously everyone needs to contact their own advisor for their specific situation. But generally speaking, there's a couple things that are really important to note. 1 is that, first of all, there's almost no other investment vehicle that has this deduction that allows you to offset the income from the property. So if you're earning returns from your rentals, then the cost seg can be used to offset that income. So in of itself, I mean, that's an awesome benefit. However, like you said, getting more rental properties, having more rental investments, depreciation from one property can be used to offset income or gains from any property. So you may have, a portfolio and do cost seg on one and then use that income or those losses to offset the other income. So that's the first thing. So yes, having more rental properties, having more real estate investments is a great strategy to help to use the cost seg benefit. The second thing, which is obviously not necessarily for everyone, but the rule about the real estate professional status, it's one of a couple, meaning if you or your spouse qualifies as a real estate professional, then you get to use this benefit of using cost seg to offset your active income or your spouse's active income. So the suggestion I have is, convince your spouse to become a real estate professional, or or if you're not married yet, find a dating site that specializes in real estate and get something like that. Tongue in cheek aside, I think it is actually a very powerful tool when used, and I have tons of clients that actually do this. That one is the husband or wife is a real estate professional, and the other is a high earner, and they own real estate, and they get to use these benefits.
Right, right. And if you're in real estate, it's not that difficult to become a real estate professional if you're spending the hours and meet the criteria of the IRS. You just have to pay
Mhm.
attention to it and document it, right?
Yeah, uh,
Good.
absolutely. It is a little bit tedious, the documentation process, but it's possible.
Right, right. Good points. So going back to that 100%, um, do you want to talk about the current law and if 100% is still achievable and where all that is today?
Sure. So there's something we talked about cost segregation where we're accelerating depreciation into faster categories. Like there's the 5-year property, the interior, as I mentioned. There's something called 15-year property, which is land improvements, anything outside the property. So once you've done a cost seg, you have this law that's called bonus depreciation. Now, bonus depreciation has been around in many forms over the years and over the decades, but in 2017, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it actually came into its current form, or not entirely current, but there was something introduced called 100% bonus depreciation, which says once you've done a cost segregation, you're able to take 100% of those accelerated deductions in the first year. So instead of spreading some of the depreciation over a 5-year or 15-year period, which increases, and doubles or triples your deductions during those earlier years, you can take a lump sum of those deductions. So just to kind of give and I'll get more into the specifics of the law and how that may change in a second, but just to kind of visualize it for people, I think like, okay, he's talking about this 5-year and 100%. Like, what does that mean in dollars? Like, tell me how much money I'm going to save. So think about it like this. If you buy $1 million property, your typical normal depreciation without cost seg, divide that by 27 and a half. You have to take off a little bit for land, which doesn't depreciate, but divide that by 27. You're going to have about $30,000 of deduction. That's called your straight line regular depreciation deduction. Now, that's amazing. First of all, let's just put it there, right? You buy a property and you're able to just automatically, just because you bought it, write off $30,000 from your income tax. Okay. I think everyone can agree that's amazing. What bonus depreciation or what cost seg does is, let's say we're going to take 25% of that and take in the first year, or over a 5-year period, let's say first cost seg. Okay, so $250,000 we're now going to spread over a 5-year period and getting you an extra, besides the 30,000, getting about an extra $50,000 a year of deductions during those first 5 years. That's simply how cost seg works. So again, that's $80,000 together of deductions over the first 5 years instead of 30. So again, really beneficial in of itself. What bonus depreciation said was you have the option to take that lump sum $250,000 deduction in the first year, right? So instead of a $30,000 deduction, a big whopping $250,000 tax write-off. Now, that can be extremely beneficial for someone who has more income and or they're a real estate professional, and they can use that against other sources of income. So that's, in a nutshell, just the numbers. So it's not so abstract. We're talking about a huge, huge benefit. And I'm using round numbers, 25%, $250,000. It varies on type and size of property, et cetera. But on average, that's 25% is for many types of properties is the average amount that we can accelerate depreciation of. Excuse me.
Right.
So
And go ahead.
back to the actual law, right?
Yep.
So it was 100% bonus between when that law was passed at the end of 2017 through 2022. So in the law, it stated it's going to start phasing out to reduce the amount of bonus depreciation you can take. So in 2023, if you bought a property in 2023, it was only 80% bonus depreciation, which means you can take 80% of those deductions in the first year, the remaining 20% still spread over those faster 5 and 15-year accelerated depreciation. 2024, currently, we're at the time of this recording, is at 60% and will continue to phase out by 20% each year on that. Now, you asked if that's going to change. Today, at the time of this recording, okay, we're recording this. I don't know if you want me to tell you, but
Yeah,
we're
January
at January
2024.
29th, okay, is today on the floor. In another hour from now, there's actually a vote in the House if there's a law that is going to be passed to reinstitute the 100% bonus depreciation for 2022, because again, it went down to 80% then. So it's going to reinstate it retroactively through 2025. So it's going to continue the 100%. I think it's a huge, it's called the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act. It's a big, reform that has, hundreds of different things in it. One of them is also wiping out the employee retention credits, right? The ERC, which was a little bit controversial over the past few years. But again, it has a lot of different things in this bill. And one of them is the restoring 100% bonus depreciation for property. So that's a huge thing. We're all obviously waiting very patiently for this law to be passed. And I think it will, the goal of it, I think, is to increase or stimulate the economy is really what it did because giving people tax deductions allows you to reinvest, right? Essentially. And so you're creating more jobs, you're creating more opportunities. And I think that's the goal behind it.
Right, right. And that's kind of an amazing part about real estate and taxation that I think a lot of people, regular people busy with their families and their jobs don't realize is that these tax laws really do encourage reinvestment for those that are in that world and more people are joining these syndications and learning, holy moly, this is pretty easy to get into and I don't have to do anything and I can write all this stuff off. And it's people are talking. So I explain it as like a new product. It's like reinvented after the Jobs Acts of 2012 and 2017. And so even though interest rates slowed it down a bit, people are realizing they can also participate in owning these great properties. So, and getting great write downs. So for people like myself that have been audited before and hate tax code in many ways, it makes you really appreciate that it's written that way for a reason. And it really does potentially for the people that follow those codes, they can write off more stuff. So yeah, it's kind of a great thing. But
Absolutely.
so tell us if you would about how the cost segregation can apply to new construction. I think that there's a case for that too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cost can apply to, I think the novelty is that it applies to a existing property more than a new construction because new construction, you depreciate everything that you are spending money on, right? So if you buy, build a property and you know exactly the cost of everything. And so therefore you can break that down with a cost segregation study and show, what the windows cost, what the flooring, the pavement, etc., every component of that, and then write those off and depreciate those on their respective schedules. But the novelty is buying an existing building, and now you can, it was built in 1925, and now you can write off the property as if it was brand new today. from a depreciation perspective. And so the job of the conservation engineers is a little more difficult because we're looking at a property and we have to essentially reverse engineer that property and show how all of the components of that add up to the purchase price, whatever that was. When in fact, if you were to reconstruct it, it wouldn't. From being an appraiser that the replacement cost is often more or less. Obviously depending on certain scenarios of what the actual building is. So from a depreciation perspective, it becomes very complicated to assign those values, and that's why the cost seg engineers are so needed in a situation like that.
So is it fair to say you are looking at those components, whether it be the short-lived items or the long-lived, estimating value new and then value in place? So you're applying the
Right.
depreciation as it is, but looking at the remaining contributory value that contributes to that price that's being paid when somebody buys it. And it's actually the contributory value that ends up being the write down. Is that right?
It's a combination. So it is a little bit of a calculation because, like you said, you're looking at a property buy for $1 million, and in it has cabinets and countertops and carpeting and appliances or what have you, and we need to assign a value to all of those and essentially add back up to reach that $1 million part, right? So we're not saying the cabinets. If you were to replace the cabinets, let's say it costs $10,000, but within the whole of the purchase, it may be worth $20,000 because it's a percentage of the whole. And so that's why the calculation based on the useful life as well as what the tax code defines the useful life of it. That's why it can get a little bit complicated adding those values.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it is a little different from when we did it in the 80s. Or what we did, and I can't even remember exactly why we did the age life, short and long live, because it was different tax code then. But anyway, so what is one of your most interesting stories about some situation that came up on a commercial property, whether it be multifamily, self-storage, anything that's got a funny twist to it?
There's a lot of twists and turns that can come about. I think when and the tax code is not logical, right? So you're going to have things in there that when a certain situation happens, the tax code says one thing where logic might dictate something else. And one of those things is actually when there's a disaster of some kind, of fire or a flood, hurricane, and the insurance covers the cost, right, of the property. And you may be able to replace it, hopefully no, there's not been any physical harm to people, but even a building, can be replaced. However, the tax code says, sorry, you can't actually depreciate money that was spent from the insurance, from the replacement. So you may have, I had a guy who had a multifamily property and there was a fire in one of the units, right? In one of the buildings. I think it was like 8 buildings all to get next to each other. It was like 100 plus unit property, 8 buildings. And there was a fire in one of the buildings, knocked out like 8 or 10 units or something like that. So he was able to replace that. Now, from a cost seg perspective, we already did the cost seg, which means we were able to write off whatever he did. But their insurance company was giving him, whatever, $500,000-$600,000 to replace the building. He's like, oh yeah, why don't we go ahead and do a cost seg on that as well? The new construction. Now, if you're doing a new construction, let's say there's 8 buildings and he was going to add on a 9th building. Now you could depreciate all of that, right? Whatever money was spent on construction, you can now do a cost seg and depreciate that, like we talked about new construction. But when the insurance company's paying for that, you can't. And so that's a really weird kind of law that kind of gets overlooked. People think, oh, insurance money, yeah. Construction and renovation, weird things happen like that all the time. But one really fascinating project that I love talking about is because it's so multifaceted, and that's where cost seg can just be exciting to see so many different aspects of it. Is a good friend of mine, actually a client for many years, who owns resort properties, and this property was kind of a rundown resort, and they revamped the whole thing. It has a golf course as well as a vineyard, a hotel, a whole meeting hall, etc. A lot of different aspects to this one property, and so they revamped it. And the interesting part is that it was really like three different. If you look at it, it's like three different projects because you have the hotel and resort, you have the golf course, which in of itself is very interesting when it comes to cost seg because it's almost all land improvements, and land improvements depreciate on a 15-year accelerated schedule, which means it can be fully written off from bonus depreciation perspective. And then you have a vineyard, which is also really, really weird. The vines themselves can be depreciated and written off at an accelerated schedule. So
I thought you were going to say that. Wow.
yeah, so all these different moving parts and aspects. So in the end of the day, it was a huge project, and a huge benefit for them and their investors.
Yeah, that would be. Wow. So, yeah. And do people compare this to oil and gas write-offs?
Sure, it has comparisons to it. Obviously that's one other really great asset class where you can have, deductions that can offset your income from the investment itself, which again, besides real estate, oil and gas is really the only other thing that does that. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of comparisons.
I don't know if their losses can carry forward. Their depreciation carries forward though. But the great thing is that it sure does with real estate. And if that W-2 earner buys the rental property later, that previously earned write-off can still work against that new asset, right? So that's good. That's good. So who are your clients generally?
We have, being the biggest cost seg company in the country, we have thousands of clients across the country, from one-off mom and pop or regular kind of investors who own single family homes to large billion-dollar corporations or REITs and things like that. So you really have everyone in between. So I don't think there's one target client that's out there. I think our specialty is everyone and everything, every asset class. And because we have that experience, we're able to do that. One thing that I love though is really, for me personally, I love educating the individuals, the big players, corporations and REITs. They're going to do cost seg. They've been doing it for decades. They're the ones that they don't really need much. It's just kind of a commodity, a service. But for the individuals who are looking to change their trajectory of their lives or their wealth, for me that's really special to be able to relate to people and educate them on a subject that they wouldn't know otherwise anything about, and allow them to actually use this tax deduction to help increase their wealth by paying less taxes, using it to reinvest, etc., to scale at a faster rate. And that to me is the most meaningful.
So true. That's great. That's important too, because a lot of people get into investing without understanding every aspect, and this is confusing to some people. So yeah.
Very much
Um,
so.
so let's just talk about if say you're called by Joe, new investor, who's buying his first 50-unit apartment project. What
Mhm.
should they expect from you start to finish?
Pretty straightforward process. So the first thing we always like to do for any property is run a free upfront feasibility analysis. So we're going to run an estimate of sorts, which can show you ahead of time for educational purposes and also for tax planning purposes, what the potential tax savings would be. Without lifting a finger, you just kind of give us some information. We can show you. So a lot of people like to get this done even in the due diligence stage. You're under contract on a property and you want to know ahead of time. So that's a really kind of valuable tool. The other thing we do is, once we engage with the customer, with the property, we're going to send our engineers out there, either physically or remotely. Since the onset of COVID, we've transitioned to doing a lot of our engineer site visits through the help of a video call, right? And so we're able to get them out to the property in that way. Obviously, some properties are larger and need that in-person kind of touch to, especially if there's hours involved in that site visit. But that's the second stage. We're going to collect some documents like closing statement, appraisal. And with that, we're going to create a very detailed report, 80, 90, 100-page report, in that is detailing everything. Think about it similar to an appraisal, right? We're literally looking at every aspect of the property and breaking it down. And then what that creates is a new depreciation schedule, a tax document that essentially allows you to, plug those numbers into your tax return and show you what the deductions, what the losses would be. So pretty straightforward. It's about a 4-week process from beginning to end on our end, and that's pretty much it.
So for like on a 50 unit project, can you ballpark a price range for something like that?
Yeah, it's not. It really does depend. It's not contingent on tax savings whatsoever, which means it's if you have $1 million property or $100 million property, the cost of getting it done is going to be pretty similar, whereas the savings are going to be obviously tremendously different. It currently, our pricing structure ranges from about, I'd say, 3,500, 4,000 on the low end to about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7,000 on the high end. You have some commercial properties that are much larger, maybe up to 10,000 or so. We're talking about like a shop 500,000 square foot shopping center or something like that would be up on the higher end.
Right, right. Okay. And about 4 weeks, you said that's really helpful to
Correct.
know.
Yeah.
And did you say that you do a free estimate in advance?
Yes, absolutely.
That's huge. Yeah, yeah. You probably can end up doing a lot of free work, but it's so beneficial. You probably end up doing the reports, so it probably pays for itself. I
Um,
would hope. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great, great. Okay, well, I want to respect our time here. I always ask everybody one main question, and that is there a pivotal person or event that happened to you that brought you to where you are today?
I would say there are so many, it's hard to count, so many pivotal events and people who have brought me to where I am today. But I do want to just highlight one person who I think really brought me to the real estate industry. I was kind of at a pivotal time in my life where I had a health crisis in my immediate family and was looking for kind of additional income and figuring out how to maybe get a second job or something like that. And I had bumped into a friend of mine whose name is David, and we'd been friends for years and years. And I was like, "Hey, I'm looking for something to do something else." And he's like, "Well, why don't you come work with me?" I was like, "Okay, what do I knew he was in real estate. I didn't know exactly what he did, but he was a commercial mortgage broker for many
Huh?
years. Was very successful at that. Also owned a lot of properties and managed them, multifamily properties. And I literally was like, okay, why not? Like I didn't know the first thing about commercial real estate, but I sat with him in his office for, almost every day for about 9 months and literally apprenticed him and learned so much about the real estate, commercial real estate. We did obviously like he was doing mortgages. We did that. I listened in on calls he had with, his property management and things like that on that side as well. So really did a ton. So that was one person I think had a very pivotal effect on my career, on my life.
Well, that's great. That is. So you can do a shout out if you want to do his whole name. We'll put it in the hashtags and but it's up to you.
Oh yeah, David Weinstein.
Okay.
He's a really amazing guy. He's started several companies, and not sure what what his latest is called, but he is a
Well,
commercial lender as well as an investor.
well, that's great. Then he'll get a little perk out of it maybe too. Who knows?
There you go.
So, I also, since I happen to know we're both in the same mastermind, probably a couple different of them, but you are all about teaching. You are a pivotal person yourself for that
Hmm.
reason. So I have this special series you probably don't know about called Local Legends and Pivotal People.
Hmm.
And I am going to declare you a pivotal person. So
Well, thank
that
you.
makes you go on a special screen and whatnot and special promotion on my podcast as a pivotal person. So welcome and thank you for doing all that because it does take a lot of patience and a lot of repetition explaining this over and over and over, I know. But it's fantastic that you're out there and you're really out there doing it in all different places, I know. So thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
that.
Thank you
And
so
so
much.
tell people how they can reach you.
Well, the best place you can find me is my website, yonahweiss.com, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm extremely active on LinkedIn and on many of the social platforms as well. But give me a shout.
Great, great. Well, thank you again, and we'll probably have you back at some point as well here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Okay, take care.